The wedding was over, but the whispers had only just begun. In the days that followed, a single photograph swept through social media. A pale blue scarf caught midair, petals scattered across polished marble, and an elderly woman crumpled on the floor. No one cared who she was. No one asked why she was there. But to Chike, the man in the photograph's blurred background, something in that image clawed at his memory. It wasn't the scandal that kept him awake at night. It was the details, the silver and black dreadlocks tied neatly at the back, the faint outline of an eagle tattoo on a weathered hand. Memories he had long buried began to surface, memories of a childhood in Nigeria, of a woman who disappeared without a goodbye. They told him she was gone forever. But now, the possibility burned in his chest. What if she had been alive all along? And yet, if she was truly his mother, why had she chosen this moment, of all moments, to return? In a city buzzing with gossip, ambition, and unspoken truths, the answer would unravel more than Chike ever imagined. Because this wasn't just about a wedding gone wrong. It was about secrets built to protect, lies told to survive, and a past powerful enough to destroy everything in its path. Chike sat at his desk long after the rest of the office had gone quiet. The city skyline twinkled beyond the glass, but his eyes were fixed on the printed photograph in his hand. He had zoomed in, sharpened it, tried to make sense of every blurred edge. The more he stared, the more the feeling grew that this was no stranger. He remembered the nights in Lagos when power cuts plunged the house into darkness. A soft humming voice would guide him to bed, the scent of hibiscus tea drifting from the kitchen. Her face was fuzzy in his mind, almost like a dream, but her voice had never left him. And now here she was, or someone who looked just like her, knocked to the ground in front of the world. The bride, Amara, had dismissed the incident as nothing more than a misunderstanding. She shouldn't have been there, Amara had said with a shrug, her ruby red gown swaying as she turned away from the cameras. But Chike knew there was more. The look in the old woman's eyes wasn't that of a gatecrasher caught in the wrong place. It was a look that held decades of history. The next day, he found himself driving to the hotel where the wedding had been held. He retraced her steps in his mind. The moment she entered through the grand doors, the bouquet slipping from her hands. The shock in the room. He asked the staff if they remembered her. Most shook their heads. One young waiter hesitated, then said quietly, "She asked where you were before it happened." That stopped him cold. Why would a stranger ask for him? Later that night, he called his aunt in Nigeria. He hadn't spoken to her in years, but she had been the keeper of family secrets. At first she spoke in riddles, avoiding his questions. But when he pressed, her voice cracked. "Chike," she whispered, "not everything you were told about your mother was true." She told him about the years after his father lost his job. The debts, the threats, the night his mother vanished to protect them both. She spoke of coded letters that never reached him. Of a woman living in the shadows, far from home. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still one gaping hole. Why now? Why had she come back only to disappear again? By midnight, Chike was pacing his apartment, the photograph still in his hand. He knew the media would soon move on, the gossip would fade, and the image would be buried under newer scandals. If he wanted the truth, he had to move before she slipped away again. The next morning, he followed the only lead he had, the small, worn leather bag she carried. It had fallen open when she stumbled, spilling its contents across the floor. Someone had taken it to the hotel's lost and found. Inside, he found an old photograph of a young woman holding a baby. The edges frayed, the colors fading. On the back, in careful handwriting, were the words, "For my Chike, until we meet again." His chest tightened. There was no more doubt. But with that certainty came a storm of questions and a gnawing fear. Because if she had been hiding all these years, there had to be a reason. And if that reason was still out there, coming for her, then finding her might put them both in danger. The morning air in the city felt heavier than usual. Chike walked down the street. The photograph of the young woman and baby tucked deep into his jacket pocket, almost like he was hiding a piece of himself from the world. He couldn't shake the feeling that every step he took was leading him into something much bigger than a family reunion. He started with the most obvious place, the small Nigerian cafe 2 blocks from the hotel. It was the kind of place where news traveled faster than coffee could be poured, where people who didn't want to be found sometimes lingered in the far corner, blending into the chatter. The owner, a wiry man named Tund, recognized Chike instantly. "Saw you on the news," he said, sliding a steaming cup across the counter. "That wedding. That woman." Chike froze, but before he could respond, Tund lowered his voice. "She came here a few times this week. Always sat by the window, watching. Said she was waiting for someone." "Me?" Chike asked. Tund didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached under the counter and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "She left this," he said, placing it gently on the counter. Chike unfolded it. The handwriting was small, deliberate. "If you find this, it means I couldn't reach you at the wedding. There are things you need to know, but be careful who you trust." At the bottom was an address, a rundown apartment complex on the far side of town. By the time Chike reached the building, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows over cracked concrete. He climbed the narrow stairs, each creak underfoot echoing in the dim hallway. At the door marked 4B, he knocked. No answer. Her pale yellow dress softened by the fading light, the powder blue scarf catching a breeze from the open stairwell. Her eyes locked on his, and for a long moment, neither spoke. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was low, almost trembling. "I didn't want you to see me like that. On the ground. Humiliated. You could have called me," Chike said, his voice sharper than he intended. "I couldn't," she replied. "Not with the people still watching." The words hung in the air. Chike wanted to ask who these people were, but something in her expression warned him not to push too fast. Instead, he stepped aside to let her pass into the apartment. Inside, the walls were bare except for a single framed photograph. His father, much younger, smiling in a way Chike had never seen before. She noticed him staring. "That was before he lost everything," she said softly. "Before I had to make a choice." "What choice?" Chike asked. "To disappear," she said simply. "Because staying would have cost you your life." The weight of her words pressed down on him. All his life he had been told his mother had died when he was a boy. Now here she was, alive, telling him she had been hiding to protect him from something, or someone. Before he could speak again, there was a sudden knock on the door. Not a neighbor's knock. Heavy, repeated. Nyasha's eyes flicked to him, and in that instant, he saw something flash across her face. Not fear, but readiness. She moved quietly to the side of the door, gesturing for him to stay silent. The knocking stopped. Then footsteps retreated down the hallway. Nyasha exhaled slowly. "They know you're here," she said. "We don't have much time." The silence after the footsteps faded was almost more unsettling than the knocking itself. Chike's heart pounded in his ears, and he realized his hands had curled into fists without him noticing. He forced them to relax, but the tension stayed in his shoulders. Nyasha crossed the small room and drew the curtains shut. The faint glow from the street lamps outside seeped in around the edges, casting long shadows on the floor. "They'll come back," she said quietly. "They always do." Chike took a step toward her. "Who are they?" She hesitated, eyes searching his face as if weighing whether he was ready for the truth. "Men who work for the people who ruined your father. People who wanted control and would do anything to keep it. They know you've become someone they can't ignore. Your company, your success, it put you back on their radar." Chike tried to process her words, but it felt like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. "I thought this was about you. About us." "It is," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But it's also about what they think you might know. What I know. They can't risk it." She walked over to the old leather bag she had carried at the wedding. From inside, she pulled out a bundle of faded documents tied together with string. She laid them on the table and untied the knot. Pages spilled out, photographs, receipts, handwritten letters. Chike leaned in. The photographs were of a younger Nyasha, sometimes with his father, sometimes alone, standing outside buildings he didn't recognize. One photo caught his attention, a man in a sharp suit shaking hands with his father. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's him," Nyasha said, following his gaze. "Obi Okon, the man who orchestrated everything. He made sure your father lost his job. He made sure we had no way to fight back. And when I tried, he made sure you'd be safer without me." Chike felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "Why now? Why find me after all these years?" "Because," she said, locking eyes with him, "I heard his name again. In connection with your company. He's back, and this time, he's coming for you." Before Chike could respond, the sound of a car engine outside drew their attention. Nyasha moved quickly to the window. peeking through a thin gap in the curtain. Black SUV. 2 men inside. They're watching the building. Adrenaline surged through Chike. We need to call the police. Nyasha shook her head. The police won't help. Some of them work for him. I learned that the hard way. She grabbed the documents, stuffed them back into her bag, and looked at him. We have to move. Now. They slipped out the back of the building, using the narrow alley that ran between 2 blocks of apartments. The night air was cool, and their footsteps echoed off the walls. Chike followed her through twisting side streets until they reached an old bus station, half-lit and nearly empty. Nyasha stopped and turned to him. There's a place we can go, somewhere safe. But once we get there, you'll have to decide. This isn't just about surviving. It's about deciding whether you want to fight. Chike's mind raced. Every instinct told him to demand answers before taking another step. But something in her eyes, the same eyes he had seen in the photograph as a child, told him she was running out of time to protect him. The bus headlights cut through the darkness as it pulled in. Nyasha took his hand, and for the first time in decades, he didn't pull away. They boarded together, disappearing into the dim interior as the driver closed the doors. As the bus pulled away from the station, Chike glanced out the window. The black SUV was still there, idling under a street lamp, 2 silhouettes watching them vanish into the night. The bus rumbled along the nearly empty streets, its interior dim except for the occasional flicker of passing streetlights. Chike sat by the window, his mind a storm of questions. Nyasha sat beside him, the worn leather bag clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. Neither spoke for several minutes. The hum of the engine filled the silence. But Chike could feel the weight of what was left unsaid pressing down on them. Finally, he broke the silence. You keep saying this is about protecting me, but you've been gone my whole life. Why didn't you protect me then? Nyasha's gaze didn't leave the road ahead. Because the only way to keep you safe was to disappear. They had eyes everywhere. If they knew you were mine, they would have used you. You were better off believing I was gone. Chike turned to look at her, the anger and confusion in his chest twisting tighter. And now? What's changed? Her hands tightened around the bag. Now, you're too visible. Your name is in papers, on television. Your technology is changing the game. That makes you a target. And I've already lost too much to lose you as well. The bus jolted to a stop, making Chike grab the seat in front of him. Nyasha stood and nodded toward the door. We're here. They stepped into a quiet part of town, where the air smelled faintly of the sea and the narrow streets were lit by old lamps that gave off a warm, uneven glow. Nyasha led him through a maze of alleyways until they reached a nondescript building with peeling paint and a rusted metal door. Inside, the space was small but orderly. Maps and old photographs covered one wall, a single desk in the corner stacked with files. It was clear someone had been living here, but it didn't feel like a home, more like a hideout. Chike took in the room. What is this place? A safe house, she replied, setting the leather bag down on the desk. I've used it for years, when I needed to stay off the grid. She opened the bag again and pulled out a different bundle, this one newer, with clean, sharp edges. Spreading the papers out on the desk, she gestured for him to come closer. Chike scanned them. They were blueprints, corporate memos, and surveillance photos, all tied to a single company name. His own. What is this? He asked, his voice low. Evidence, Nyasha said. They've been infiltrating your company for months. Slowly, quietly. The man in charge, Obi Okon, wants control of your technology. And if he can't get it by buying you out, he'll take it another way. Chike stared at her, his pulse quickening. How do you know all this? Her expression shifted, the lines in her face deepening. Because I've been watching him. For years. Even after I left you, I never stopped. I've followed his movements, his deals, his mistakes. And now, he's moving faster than ever. She slid one photograph toward him. It showed Obi stepping out of a black SUV, shaking hands with a man Chike recognized from his own executive team. Chike felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. Someone inside. Nyasha nodded. Someone you trust. And they're feeding him everything. The room seemed smaller now, the air heavier. Chike didn't know what was worse, the fact that his company was compromised, or that this woman who had been a ghost in his life was suddenly the only one who seemed to understand the danger. Nyasha stepped closer, her voice low but unshakable. You have 2 choices. You can keep pretending nothing's wrong and lose everything. Or you can trust me and fight. But if you choose the second, there's no turning back. The old clock on the wall ticked loudly in the stillness. Chike looked at her, and for the first time since she walked into his life again, he saw not just the woman who left, but the fighter beneath the years, the one who had survived long enough to bring him this warning. And in that moment, he knew the real danger wasn't that Obi Okon was coming for him. The real danger was that he had been inside the gates all along. The next morning, the city was already alive with movement when Chike woke on the small cot in the corner of the safe house. The faint smell of brewed coffee drifted through the room, mingling with the salt in the air from the nearby docks. Nyasha sat at the desk, her back straight, eyes scanning a spread of documents under the soft yellow light of a single lamp. "You're up," she said without looking at him. "Good. We have work to do." Chike rubbed his eyes, still heavy from the weight of last night's revelations. "I've barely processed what you told me. And you're already planning, what exactly?" Nyasha tapped one of the papers. "A trap. If Obi Okon has someone inside your company, we can draw them out. But it has to be done in a way that leaves no doubt." Chike crossed the room and looked at the desk. She had laid out a blueprint of his company's new data facility, one that had not been made public yet. Beside it were schedules, photos, and a list of names, each one circled or crossed out. "You've been collecting this for how long?" he asked. "Long enough to know who can be trusted and who can't," she replied. "But Obi is careful. He doesn't make a move unless he thinks the board is in his pocket." Chike frowned. "So you want me to bait him?" Nyasha's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Exactly. We leak the existence of a fake upgrade, something valuable enough to make him move fast. The mole will carry it to him. When they do, we follow." Chike studied her. For a woman in her late 60s, she had the focus and precision of someone who had never stopped calculating. But beneath it all, he could see the fatigue etched into her features, the years of running, watching, and carrying secrets too heavy for one person. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "It can't just be about protecting me now." She met his gaze. "It's about finishing what I started. And maybe earning the right to stand in the open again." They spent the next hours in hushed conversation, piecing together the details. Nyasha instructed him on what to say to his executives, how to frame the announcement so it would spread quickly but not raise suspicion. Every step was deliberate. By midday, Chike was back in his glass-walled office, his staff moving briskly through the halls. He gathered his senior team and spoke with calculated enthusiasm about the breakthrough upgrade, a project so sensitive it was still off record. He watched their faces carefully, searching for the smallest flicker of reaction. And he saw it. A quick, almost imperceptible shift in the eyes of one man, Femi, his head of operations. It was gone as fast as it appeared, but Chike's gut told him Nyasha had been right. That night, back at the safe house, he told her. She nodded, not surprised. Femi has been on Obi's payroll before. Small jobs, small payouts. This time, the stakes are higher. The following days were a waiting game. They tracked Femi's movements, watched him meet with a courier in a quiet cafe, and followed the courier to a gated compound on the city's outskirts. Each step tightened the net. On the third night, Nyasha handed Chike a small earpiece. "Tomorrow, you'll confront him. But remember, the goal isn't to scare him. It's to make him lead us straight to Obi." Chike took the earpiece, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about his company anymore. It was about trust, betrayal, and a truth that had been hidden for decades. Nyasha adjusted her scarf, the pale blue catching the light. "When this is over, you'll know everything. But be ready. Chike, the truth isn't always the relief we think it will be." Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark horizon, and somewhere beyond them, Obi Okon was waiting, unaware that the woman he thought had vanished long ago was walking straight toward him. The next morning was heavy with the kind of heat that clung to the skin and slowed the air. Chike sat in his office earlier than usual, the earpiece Nyasha had given him resting in his palm. His thoughts were a restless tide, each wave crashing against the same question. Could he pull this off without losing control? The phone on his desk buzzed. It was a short message from Nyasha. "He's moving today. Be ready." By the time the sun had risen above the skyline, Chike's office was filled with the low hum of activity. Femi walked in, his usual confident stride tempered by something sharper, a quiet urgency. Chike forced a smile. "Morning, Femi." We need to go over the upgrade plans before the meeting. They sat across from each other, the blueprint spread between them. Chike spoke about timelines, budgets, and technical specs, his voice calm, rehearsed. But his mind was fixed on the subtle tells. The way Femi's eyes lingered on certain pages, the slight tremor when he jotted down notes. Nyasha's voice came softly through the earpiece. He's recording. Let him think you don't notice. Hours later, they left the office under the guise of visiting the data facility. Femi had insisted on driving, which was exactly what Nyasha had predicted. Chike kept his gaze on the city outside the window, but his pulse quickened as they headed away from the familiar streets. In the safe house, Nyasha monitored their progress through a GPS tracker sewn into Chike's jacket. She watched the small that moved steadily toward the edge of the city, her eyes narrowing when the route diverted down a dirt road flanked by overgrown trees. The car slowed in front of a compound with high walls and a rusted gate. Femi glanced at Chike. "Stay here. I won't be long." But Chike didn't stay. He stepped out, his footsteps quiet on the gravel, following at a careful distance. He saw Femi speak to a guard, hand over a slim folder, the same folder from Chike's office. Nyasha's voice was in his ear again. "You have what we need. Now pull back." Chike hesitated. He could see movement inside the compound. Shadows, voices, and then a figure stepped into view. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence carrying the weight of someone who was used to commanding fear. Obi Okon. Even from a distance, Chike could feel the air shift. Obi took the folder, leafed through it, and said something to Femi that made the man stiffen. Then, Obi's gaze swept toward the road, toward Chike. Nyasha's tone hardened. "Chike, leave. Now." But it was too late. Obi's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. He gestured, and two men stepped forward from the shadows. Chike turned, walking quickly back to the car. He could feel the weight of their eyes on his back, but no one followed. As he got in, Femi avoided his gaze, his hands tied on the wheel. Back at the safe house, Nyasha listened to every detail Chike recounted. When he finished, she leaned back, her face unreadable. "He saw you, which means he knows you're not just sitting in your office waiting to be taken." Chike swallowed. "And you?" Her eyes darkened, a shadow of the past flickering there. "Obi Okon and I have unfinished business. If he's recognized you, it's only a matter of time before he realizes who's helping you." She stood, moving to the window. The pale blue scarf at her shoulders shifted in the light. "We accelerate the plan. Tomorrow, we don't just bait the mole. We bring Obi into the open." Chike felt the room tighten around him. This was no longer about patience or careful steps. It was about survival, and the truth Nyasha had been holding back since the day they met. The city was restless that night. Streetlights flickered under the weight of moths, and a warm wind carried the faint smell of rain that never came. In the safe house, Chike sat at the table, his fingers drumming against a half-empty glass of water. Nyasha paced in front of the window, her pale yellow dress muted by the dim lamplight, the blue scarf at her shoulders shifting with each turn. "You're certain he recognized me?" she said at last. Her voice low, more to herself than to Chike. Chike nodded. He didn't follow. But that smile, it wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. Nyasha stopped pacing. She stared out into the street, her eyes tracing shadows only she could see. Obi Okon doesn't smile unless he's already 3 moves ahead. Which means tomorrow, we're walking straight into his trap, or he's walking into ours. The plan had been simple in theory. Draw out the mole, tie the chain of evidence back to Obi, and deliver it to the right hands. But now, with Obi's attention on both of them, the stakes had doubled. By morning, the air had turned heavy and gray. Chike arrived at the company's downtown headquarters under the guise of a high-profile investor meeting. Security was tight, every entrance flanked by men in dark suits. Femi was already inside, playing the part of a loyal lieutenant. Nyasha slipped into the building through a side service entrance, her worn leather bag hanging from her shoulder. Her steps were steady, but inside her chest, her heart beat with the quiet urgency of a drum before battle. She knew this building well. Years ago, when she was still in the field, she'd walked these same halls under a different name, with different loyalties. Chike kept his movements deliberate, greeting guests, shaking hands, masking the tension with practiced charm. Femi lingered close, watching. Every so often, their eyes met, a silent exchange neither wanted to name. Then, just after noon, the atmosphere shifted. Nyasha felt it before she saw him. Obi Okon stepping into the boardroom like he owned the air in it. Tall, broad-shouldered, his suit the deep shade of midnight. He carried himself with the calm weight of someone who had never needed to hurry for anything in his life. His gaze swept the room and landed on Nyasha. For a moment, the years fell away, and she saw the man she had once tracked across 3 continents. The man whose shadow had touched her family long before Chike was born. "Nyasha," he said, his voice smooth, carrying just enough volume to command the room. "I was beginning to think you were only a ghost." Chike's eyes flicked between them. He had never heard Obi speak her name before. The connection was there, in the way they regarded each other, not as strangers, but as 2 players who had been moving pieces on the same board for far too long. Nyasha didn't flinch. "You've always been good at finding ghosts, Obi. But this time, you'll regret it." The boardroom fell into a strange, charged silence. Even Femi seemed unsure of his footing. Obi's smile deepened, but it was colder now. "Then let's see if you still know how to play." 2 of his men stepped forward. Nyasha didn't move. She simply reached into her bag, pulling out a small flash drive. "Everything you've done, every account you've hidden, every name you've bought, it's all here. And it's already on its way to people who don't care about your charm." Obi's expression didn't change, but Chike saw the flicker in his eyes. For the first time, the man looked unsettled. "This isn't just about me," Nyasha continued, her voice steady. "It's about the boy you almost destroyed before he had a chance to live. The boy who grew into the man standing beside me." Chike's chest tightened. She wasn't talking about any case file. She was talking about him. And for the first time, he began to suspect that Nyasha's reason for protecting him ran far deeper than corporate betrayal or revenge. For a long, breathless moment, no one in the boardroom moved. The walls seemed to press in, the hum of the air conditioning suddenly loud against the heavy silence. Chike's pulse thudded in his ears, but his eyes stayed locked on Nyasha. There was something in her voice, a quiet, unshakable certainty, that made him feel both protected and unsteady. Obi took a slow step forward. "You speak as if you know him," he said, glancing at Chike with a faint smirk. "More than you should." Nyasha didn't look away. "I've known him his whole life," she replied, the words falling like stones into still water. "Even when I wasn't there, I knew." The room shifted. Some of the board members exchanged confused glances. Femi stiffened near the corner, his expression unreadable. Chike's breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying?" Chike asked quietly. Nyasha's gaze softened for the first time since she entered the building. "I'm saying that the boy I had to leave behind, the boy I watched from a distance, praying he would grow up safe, is you." It was as if the floor gave way beneath him. He wanted to speak, to ask the questions that had burned in his mind for years, but Obi's laugh cut through the moment. "How touching," Obi drawled. "A reunion decades in the making. But you've made a mistake, Nyasha. You think your little file will ruin me? You think anyone will believe a ghost who abandoned her own child?" Nyasha straightened her shoulders. "I left to protect him from you," she said, her voice sharp now. "From your reach. From the people you own. Every day I stayed away was a day I bought him time." Chike's chest ached. He saw flashes in his mind. Birthdays where a stranger's gift appeared without explanation, the shadow of a woman in the distance at his school gate. The feeling of being watched but never threatened. Pieces of his life were falling into place. Obi's eyes narrowed. "And now you think you can take me down in my own house?" Nyasha took a step forward, closing the space between them. "I don't need to. You already did it to yourself. The accounts are frozen. Your partners know you've been double-dealing them. By the time you walk out of this room, you'll be a name people whisper only in warning." Obi's jaw tightened, but his calm mask never fully broke. "This isn't over." He motioned to his men. "Clear the room." The board members scattered, their expensive shoes clicking quickly against the polished floor. Femi stayed in place, his eyes on Chike, as if deciding where his loyalty truly lay. Chike took a slow breath, his mind still reeling from Nyasha's revelation. "Why now?" he asked her. "Why tell me here, in front of him?" "Because this is the moment you need to know who you are," Nyasha said. "And because he needs to hear that I didn't fail you." Obi moved toward the door, his broad shoulders filling the frame. "Enjoy your little victory," he said without looking back. "It won't last." When the door closed behind him, The tension in the room cracked like ice underfoot. Chike turned fully to Nyasha. "We're not done talking about this." "You're right," she said softly. "But first, we finish what we came here to do." Femi finally stepped forward, his voice low. "You just put a target on both your backs." Nyasha looked at him, her eyes steady. "Then we make sure he's the one who can't sleep at night." For the first time, Chike felt something shift inside him. Not just the need to win, but the pull of blood, of unfinished history. The storm had only just begun. The elevator ride down from the boardroom was too quiet. Chike stood beside Nyasha, his hands in his pockets, his thoughts spinning so fast he could barely keep up. Every glance at her felt like seeing a stranger and a memory at the same time. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the glowing floor numbers as the elevator descended. When the doors slid open to the lobby, the sound of distant chatter and the echo of polished shoes pulled them back into the present. The marble floor gleamed under the overhead lights. But something about the air felt wrong. Too still, too rehearsed. "Don't stop walking," Nyasha murmured, her voice almost lost in the hum of the lobby. Chike frowned but obeyed, matching her pace. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted two men in tailored suits leaning against a column. Not security guards, not employees, just watchers. Their eyes tracked Nyasha like a hawk watching prey. "Obi's not going to wait for the dust to settle," Nyasha said quietly. "He'll move now, before the evidence spreads too far." They pushed through the glass doors into the open air. The city night wrapped around them, neon signs reflecting off wet pavement. The rain from earlier still lingered, pooling in the cracks of the sidewalk. A sleek black car eased up to the curb. The tinted window rolled down, and Femi's face appeared in the shadows. "Get in," he said. Chike hesitated. "You were with him a few hours ago. Why should we?" "You don't have time to argue." Femi cut in. "There are eyes on you from every angle. If you leave here on foot, you won't make it past the corner." Nyasha studied Femi's expression for a long moment, then nodded. She slid into the back seat, and Chike followed. The doors locked automatically. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic. Femi's hands were steady on the wheel, but his jaw was tight. "Obi sent people to your apartment, Chike. They won't find you there now, but they will wait. He's not aiming to scare you. He's aiming to erase you." Chike leaned back, the weight of the evening pressing down. "Why are you helping us?" Femi's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "Because I've been waiting years for someone to stand up to him. And because I knew your mother, Chike. Not like you think, but enough to know she's telling you the truth." Nyasha stayed silent, her gaze locked on the passing city lights. The car turned off the main road, winding through a narrow industrial district. Old warehouses loomed in the dark, their windows glowing faintly. Femi stopped in front of a steel door tucked between two shuttered shops. "Inside," he said. Chike stepped out, scanning the shadows. They followed Femi into the dim interior of what looked like a long-abandoned printing press. The air smelled of paper and dust, but the hum of hidden machinery echoed faintly. "This is where we work," Femi said, "and where you'll finish this." Nyasha walked to a metal table at the center of the room. Spread across it were files, flash drives, and a single old photo, a younger Nyasha holding a small boy, both smiling, the edges of the picture worn with time. Chike's breath caught. "That's me." Nyasha finally met his eyes. "That's the last day I saw you before I disappeared. Obi's people were closing in. I had to make you invisible to him." Before Chike could answer, a sharp crack split the air, the sound of a gunshot outside. Femi's head snapped toward the door. "They found us," he said. Nyasha's hand closed around Chike's wrist. "This ends tonight. But we do it together." The tension in the room coiled tight. Outside, footsteps crunched on wet gravel, drawing closer. The fight was about to come to them. The sound of footsteps outside grew sharper, closer. Nyasha's grip on Chike's wrist tightened, not in fear but in urgency. Her eyes locked onto his. The same eyes from the faded photograph, now brimming with a fierce resolve. "Stay behind me," she whispered. Before Chike could respond, the steel door shuddered with a heavy thud. Then another. Dust fell from the ceiling as the pounding intensified. Femi moved quickly, pulling a small control box from under the table and flipping a switch. Somewhere deep inside the walls, hidden locks clicked into place. "They'll breach in less than 2 minutes," Femi said, his voice low but steady. "We can't run. We end it here." Nyasha stepped forward. her scarf slipping slightly over her shoulder, revealing the deep scar along her collarbone, an old wound, a silent reminder of the life she'd led before disappearing. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages stuffed with documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. "This," she said, placing it on the table, "is everything Obi has buried for 30 years. Names, dates, bank accounts, and proof that he was behind the fire that took your grandmother's life, Chike." Chike's breath caught. The fire wasn't an accident. Her voice softened but never wavered. "No, it was a message. To me. I went into hiding to protect you, but I never stopped gathering the truth." The pounding at the door turned into the screech of metal as crowbars forced their way into the frame. Femi slid a pistol across the table toward Nyasha, but she pushed it back toward him. "This isn't about ending his life. It's about making sure he can't hide anymore." She handed Chike a small flash drive. "This has everything in the journal and more. The moment we get out of here, you send it to every major news outlet and the authorities. No editing. No deals. Promise me." Chike stared at it, then at her. "And what happens to you?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I stopped thinking about myself a long time ago." The steel door finally burst inward, slamming against the wall. Men in dark suits surged inside, their boots heavy on the concrete. At the front was Obi himself, his face a mask of cold fury. "So," Obi said, his voice dripping with contempt, "the ghost finally steps out of the shadows. And she brings my protege with her." Nyasha stepped forward, unafraid. "Not your protege. Your son." The room froze. Even the men behind Obi exchanged uncertain glances. Obi's eyes narrowed, searching her face for the lie, but found only truth. "You're lying," he said, though the edge in his voice faltered. "Look at him," Nyasha said, gesturing toward Chike. "Same eyes, same stubborn jaw. The difference is he still has a soul." For the first time, Obi's composure cracked. But before he could speak, Femi activated the overhead projector. The wall behind them lit up with images, photographs, bank transfers, court documents, each one damning, each one tying Obi to decades of corruption. "You can destroy us," Femi said, his voice cutting through the tension. "But this is already uploading to a dozen servers. By morning, the whole country will know." Obi's men hesitated. The weight of exposure was heavier than any weapon in the room. Nyasha took one slow step toward Obi. "You built an empire on fear, but fear dies when the truth walks in." Obi's glare shifted from Nyasha to Chike, then back again. For a moment, he seemed smaller, like the years had finally caught up to him. Without a word, he turned and walked out, his men following reluctantly. The door clanged shut behind them, leaving only the sound of Nyasha's unsteady breathing and the faint hum of the projector. Chike slipped the flash drive into his pocket, his hands trembling. "We're not done yet." Nyasha looked at him, pride and sorrow mingling in her gaze. "No, but for the first time, we're not running." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, the sound of the world finally catching up. The night air was cool as Nyasha stepped out into the street, the faint glow of dawn painting the horizon in soft gold. The sirens had faded, replaced by the low hum of the waking city. Chike walked beside her, the flash drive still clutched tightly in his hand, like it was the most fragile and precious thing he had ever held. They didn't speak for a while. There was too much to say, and too much that words couldn't touch. Finally, Chike broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Nyasha's eyes stayed on the pavement ahead. "Because I wanted you to live without looking over your shoulder. I wanted you to grow into your own man, not the son of a fugitive." She paused, her voice softening. "But I also knew that someday, the truth would find you. I just prayed you'd be strong enough to face it." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the frail woman who had walked into the wedding that day, but someone who had carried a lifetime of battles alone. Someone who had chosen sacrifice over comfort and truth over safety. "You didn't just protect me," Chike said quietly. "You gave me the chance to be who I am." Nyasha smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both joy and pain. "And now, you have the chance to change everything. Don't waste it." They stopped at a corner where the first rays of sunlight spilled across the cracked sidewalk. Nyasha's scarf fluttered in the breeze, its powder blue catching the light in a way that made her seem almost ethereal. "Life will always give us second chances," she said, her gaze distant. But they're never free. They come with a price. And it's up to us whether we pay it with courage or regret. Chike nodded, his jaw set with new resolve. He didn't need to answer. His decision was already made. They turned toward the rising sun, walking into the light together. For the first time in decades, Nyasha felt the weight on her shoulders begin to lift. The road ahead would be long, but it would be walked side by side. Sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones that stay unseen. Protecting someone doesn't always mean holding them close. Sometimes, it means letting them go until the truth is ready to bring them back. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in second chances. And tell me, if you were Chike, would you forgive Nyasha?